Good morning. Hi, I'm the Hermit of Loch Eyre, aka Mike Jones. I'm coming to you on a beautiful day here in the Pacific Northwest. The sky is, well, as you can see, is almost clear. The air is a little bit cold. This is episode number 3, and I'm going to today really dive in a little bit more of a culture. I know that the video that you're looking at, I'm going to change it here in a second, has a background that's much lighter, so you don't see me so much. But I am a lucky guy. I live on an island, on a lake, with a mountain, and I am a hermit. But I can't complain about this, and I just want you to see this background that I live with every day. So I really feel blessed in many ways about that. I'm going to rotate the camera if I can without messing it up. I don't know if this is any better, but maybe you can see me a little bit better, because I see these as intimate conversations, and it's hard to have a conversation with someone who's sitting in the dark unless they're in like a witness protection program or something like that. As I said before, I don't like to, or I really don't do repeats of these videos. I ad-lib them as I go because I don't have time to do 2 or 3 takes. But as I watch the videos I've made, sometimes it's not really bloopers, but I think about, well, I need to clarify a few points, and that's what I'm going to do here today before we really get started. And again, I talked about I have some paranoia, and I don't mean it literally, I don't think, but after leaving evangelicalism in 1990, it's been a long, rough road in many ways, especially during the 90s, even up to probably 2000. Well, I don't know when it finished, but maybe even going on today, where I've tried to relate to the, at one time, evangelical church, and there was a lot of pushback, a lot of anger directed at me. I'll tell those stories later, because today I really do want to focus on culture. But I wanted to explain again, when I was an evangelical and we had disagreements with other people, in that world, everything was always black and white. You're either of God or you're of the devil. And we couldn't stand people who had different dogmas than us. I know growing up, we considered Methodists going to hell, Catholics going to hell. You know, I was Baptist. So, you know what I mean? It's just that it was a dogma-centered concerns, criticisms. But I want to clarify, that's not at all what I'm doing now. And I'm going to tell this from the bottom of my heart. When I take you on this journey through this canyon, and I just finished a book called The River of Doubt. It's about Theodore Roosevelt exploring this river in Brazil. It was really rough. But it's these canyons or rapids and waterfalls. That's where we're going to go on this journey. That I'm not coming in as a critic of people, and they take it that way. And I've been a punching bag for religious people for years. I understand why they think I'm criticizing their faith. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing. I must speak truth, but I try to do it in love. And here's my honest view. The people who don't agree with me, and the vast majority of people will not agree at all with what I say in this tape, are better people than me. If we had the models of heaven as I had as a kid, where we're living up in the clouds and we have harps and things like that, I would see me in heaven as a shoeshine boy. And those people in the church who I respect and love, they would be the mayors and policemen and firemen. And not that shoeshine boys is a bad profession. But my point is, I don't look down on these people. I don't look down because I've been there. They don't think differently from me because they're stupid or they're immoral or anything like that. So I just don't want, if you're out there and you're listening to what I'm saying, please don't take it as a criticism of your personal faith or religious system. But at the same time, I want the freedom to be honest. That's what I bring to the table, a level of candor that you won't see anyone else do. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for me. I've been a punching bag here recently again for several people. And I was coming out of my hermitness a little bit, trying to get involved with the local church again. But I've decided, my life is short. I have cancer I'm dealing with, and I don't want to fight with people. I don't want to argue with people. And so I've retreated back to my life of a hermit, and there's some value to that. So that was one thing I want to clear up. A very simple thing. I know last time I was trying to establish my basis of faith for those people who are skeptical. I remember when I was an evangelical, every time I read a book, I'd have to look up and see, is this guy really a Christian? Or go to a lecture, anything like that. I was always, had this litmus test or this screen I put up in my eyes to look at this person and measure them if they are really orthodox. And I gave the simple explanation, but one of the things I said, I believe in the resurrection of Christ 100%. I don't want to get into the quagmire yet. As we go down this canyon, eventually I'm going to get into how we discover truth. And one of the things I've come to realize, and what I'm going to realize I am quite confident about, but it's a contradiction, because what I've realized is we as humans can never have certainty in anything, because we're imperfect. You cannot reach absolute conclusion when you're imperfect. Now, some religious people, and we'll get into that later too, use a Gnostic approach, Gnostic approach, meaning that God does a supernatural act in communicating directly into their brain, and therefore it's absolute and certain. Well, I think that's very dangerous. But when I said 100% certainty about the resurrection of Christ, I mean, I'm confident, I believe in it. That's where faith comes in, when you take your reason as far as it can go and it comes to a dead end. But we'll talk about that more later. I want to focus today on building this framework of culture. My conflict with American Christianity has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. It has a lot to do with culture. Actually, everything to do with culture. And I was describing before this parable of the duck and the fish, that we grow up, we are fish. We live in a culture, an American culture, a Western culture. And then on a local level, we live in these social circles. And they're all, social circles are like the bricks to the wall, and the wall is the culture. That we think that's reality. We think everything our culture tells us is absolute truth. Like the fish, only thing he knows is water. He doesn't know there's other cultures. Now, when I had my first break, or the break with evangelicalism, I was living in Cairo, Egypt as a missionary. And it gave me an insight there that I hadn't had before. I was living in a very foreign culture, and I wasn't living with Americans. All my friends were Muslims. We didn't have any American. Well, we knew some American people, but our mission organization had no one in the country that we could relate to. So it wasn't like this compound. I've worked in mission groups overseas before where they have a compound, all the Americans together. So we were immersed into the Islamic culture. The Egyptian, not just Islamic, but also the Egyptian has their own culture. And it started to become clear to me, these lines. And I describe it like, if you had I'm really bad with books. I destroy them. I've never read through a book that by the end it's not destroyed, because I'm reading it down in the woods, I'm reading it on the boat, I'm reading it hot tub, and it gets wet and all this stuff. But if you ever had a really nice clean book and left it out in the rain and the pages swell, all of a sudden the pages are so visible, when before it looked like a solid white a border around the outside, but now it's all these frayed pages. But when I was in Cairo, that's the way my American culture started to see. I'll give one quick example. We had 3 children at the time, little, one was born there. And I would carry the children with their legs around my neck, them sitting behind my head. And that's the way you do it in America. Well, I found that every time I did it in Cairo, almost without exception, some stranger would run up to me in terror and scream at me, "You don't do that, don't do that." And you have to put one leg in the front and one leg in the back. And I couldn't understand what the problem was. But it was I call it a myth, it's not true, that they believe that if you carry a child around your neck, somehow it would damage your neck and you will be, you'll have lifetime problems. There's no evidence of that I know of. But it was, once I understood that, at first I was angry at these strangers yelling at me. But then I understood they were doing it because they were concerned about me. But I thought, that's a cultural thing. But there's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of cultural differences. And that was just a very trivial one. But when you're buried in culture, you don't understand that the way you think, the way you see the world is defined by your culture. Now, religious people, Christian people, and I think it's probably true with all religions, think that the way they see the world is coming from the Bible. But it's not. Most of what I'm talking about, that's why I'm deconstructing culture, is that culture in the Christian state of Christianity goes back 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years. So the first thing I did when I came out of evangelicalism, I thought, what the heck was that? I just spent 20-some years of my life in, and I went back and read the Bible myself, and I didn't see any of the stuff that we were saying and thinking and doing. And then I started studying church history. And I started going back further and further and further and further, all the way back as early as you can go. There's not a lot of things written before the time of Constantine. But anyway, and now there's some good books about modern American evangelicalism, the history of that. And I think those are very helpful to see the culture. Now I want to talk a minute about just a very basic principles about socialization and culture. These are things that, especially if you've gone to college, you're familiar with, I would think. But we don't realize it when it's ourselves. But in the 1950s, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but postmodernism was just starting to flourish in America out of modernity. Modernity is a idea that reason and science will solve all of our problems. I think the movie Oppenheimer is an excellent example of where that idea of science solving all of our problems comes crashing to a halt with the nuclear age. But then after that, postmodernism, it's just simply what came after modernism, began to deconstruct culture. And I think that was a healthy thing. I do not like at all late postmodernism that we're now in, or it's ending, because it's given up any aspiration of truth, which will always be a disaster. But in the early days, they began to deconstruct culture and society, especially things like the Vietnam War. But there were some very interesting studies that were done back in those days. I mentioned before I was a psychology major, and I just love reading about these studies done in the 50s and 60s. But one of them, it's called the ASH. Before I get into this ASH vision test, I want to take a little detour just for a second, then we'll come back to it, is to give some examples, some very practical examples of what I'm talking about, culture and coercion on our practical level. So use your imagination for a moment. Imagine this. I don't know if you're a church-going person or not, but pretend you're going to a big church. And if you do go to church, you'll understand this scenario. It's a warm day, and you decide to go to church on a Sunday morning wearing nothing but your swimsuit. If you're a woman, a two-piece bikini. A man, your Speedo. Yeah, your Speedo. That'd be a good example. You decide to wear a Speedo and nothing else to church. Now, there's no practical reason on a warm day you couldn't do that. Now, there might be a church, I'm just thinking, I had a friend who had a clinic on the beach in Hawaii, and he talked about wearing swim trunks to work. And that, in that context, it would work. Probably not in downtown Chicago. But there's very few places in the world that you would go in and sit down without being stared at, and you feel awful, embarrassed, and people would think, he's a nut job or she's a nut job. Why are they wearing that to church for? And some people say, oh, that offends God. I have to chuckle. That wearing a swimsuit is really offensive to God. But that's culture. That's culture. Now, I don't do it because it would be very disturbing. I bet I'd be called out if I did it at my church. Someone would say, "What's wrong with you? You're distracting from the preaching." But related to that, I was reading about some early missionaries in Central Africa, the Congo, I think it was. But the normal dress for women was just a skirt and nothing above that. And as they converted to Christianity, they wanted to come to church that way, their boobs hanging out. And the missionaries, this is, late 1800s, probably early 1900s, really attacked them. They were being a affront to the creator of the cosmos because they weren't wearing a bra. And I think they gave them bras to wear. But you have to laugh at that. But this is culture. And right now, there's probably people, well, the Bible talked about lust and, give me a break. You can cherry pick things out of the Bible to support your culture, and that's what we all do, and that's the point I'm going to make in this thing. But that's just a practical example of culture. But just meditate on that feeling you would have sitting in a big church wearing just your Speedo, nothing else. Anyway, I thought that was a good mental exercise. Now back to Dr. Ash and the vision test. It's called the ASCH vision test by Dr. Ash. And this, excuse me, I think this was in early 50s. And it was about social coercion, or how the society that we're in makes us think a certain way. It's very simple. They had a group, they had a group of 100 and some college kids, but they bring them in one at a time. And they'd have like 8 or 9 actors who were all in on this. And they'd have these charts of just simple lines, different lengths of lines. They'd have a standard line, and then you'd have 4 or 5 lines that were different lengths, and you had to match which one matched the standard line. Now, this test is so simple, so obvious that a preschooler would get it every time. But in this study, they had the real student come last, and the other students would say out loud, "Oh, I think it's B," and B was obviously wrong. And the next one, "Yeah, it's B," next one B, next one B, next one B. The last one would be the real student. Now, the scientists predicted that a very small percentage of the real students would actually give a false answer in that circumstance, but some would. Well, it turned out 75% of the real students said an obviously wrong answer because the group before them had given a wrong answer. So the point of that was sort of the building blocks of how, when we're in a society, in a social system, and a social system is like a room full of rings, all different sizes, little rings, big rings, giant rings, all those things make up a culture. But like my family group is a society, an office where we work is a social group, a church is a social group, a religion is a social group, a government, like American government is a social group, a Democrat versus Republican, those are social groups. And they overlap because you're involved with several different social groups. But I said before, all social groups have 2 primary principles. One is a boundary, who's in, who's out. The second one are the rules of engagement. What are you allowed to do and what are you allowed not to do? Now, on some of these, like I said, Kiwanis Club, I'm sure their rules are very few, but they have rules. Must come to meetings, must work well if you work in our secondhand shop, things like that. But the pressure that social groups use, and it's all about conformity. The goal is conformity. They want everyone thinking alike. And why is that? Because, let's go back to that line test. If I think this line is the right answer, I want everyone to think this line is the right answer because that uplifts my self-esteem. I mean, that's the basic point of why you want conformity. So what social groups use as pressure, and go back to middle school or even elementary school, that's where these things start. Or maybe even, there's some socialization that happens right after we're born. But go back and listen to what was said, what was thought when you were that age. But it says, okay, to be in our group, you have to be cool, smart, and good. Those are the 3 things. Now, some groups, in middle school, coolness is number 1. But some groups, coolness and smartness are very big. and especially in religious groups, it's good. So there's intense pressure to shape you, to conform you to the group. If you're in that group, everybody wants you to conform to that group. And that's how social groups work. So in that vision test I just talked about was a very simple experiment to show how intense that pressure is that can make you look at a line that's 2 inches long and say to a professor, oh yeah, that's exactly the same as the line that's 4 inches long, because of that social pressure. And you say, oh, I wouldn't do that. I bet you would. 75% of these good students did that. That's what social pressure was like. There's another famous study that we actually watched a video of when I was in college. And the video, I think, is still available on YouTube. Stanley Milgram, I think his name. He was a PhD social psychologist, graduated from Harvard, became a professor at Yale, and started doing these really interesting experiments about social coercion and manipulation of people. And part of his MO, I think, was, if I remember right, his parents had survived, or maybe they didn't survive the Holocaust. Well, they had to survive to reproduce and have him, unless he was a baby. I don't know the story. But he was very interested in how the Nazis got all of Germany, got the Lutheran Church, for most part, to conform to Nazi evil, Nazi philosophy. And he was curious, how does that happen? How do we conform to a group, even if the group is in nonsense and cults? If you've ever known anybody in a cult or been in a cult, you understand how devious that can be. So he devised an experiment where he'd bring in a student, and that student is the only one who doesn't know what's going on. There's not a professor, but a scientist with a lab coat on. So we're doing an experiment on learning. We have another student in the other room, and that student was really an actor. And we're going to ask him tests, or ask him questions, and every time he or she answers wrong, you are to shock them. So there's this what we call a rheostat, or a thing of elevating strength of shock from like 5 volts all the way up to 450, I think it was. And then there's labels, you get up to the high end, it says danger, possible, lethal, and things like that. So he predicted at 1%, maybe 2% of people, he could manipulate into shocking these other students to death, or what they thought would be to death. And at the same time, this actor, this other student, at the little shot goes, ouch. And as you get up, it goes, ow. And as you get up to the top, they're screaming, oh God, have mercy, please don't. But the scientist in the lab coat is standing there telling this student to shock him. Oh, it's okay, shock him, go ahead. No, don't, just ignore what he's saying, he's okay. And when it turned out, 65% of the good, decent students were not able, but chose to shock that other student all the way to a lethal dose. When that scientist was standing there saying, it's okay, go ahead, do it. That's the power. That's a power not just of suggestion, but coercion. And I want to dig into this foundation of culture for a moment. I mean, there's lots of other things I could have said about it. But today, those studies I just described can't really be done today. They were seen as unethical. Some of the people who participated in them had some mental health issues after that. So, you can't do those today. There's been a lot of brain research. We're learning more and more about the brain. My whole career as a PA, physician associate, was in neurology. I really respect the brain function and structure. And they've looked at social coercion from a neurophysiological viewpoint. And they found that these mores, if you know what mores mean, that's the rules, the standards of that particular circle, are so intense. And they've been able to see where these, I won't describe these studies, but using a functional MRI, we're able to see that these things are stored in a part of the brain called the insula, which I think is Latin for island. It's like a probably softball-sized area deep in the brain. If you go in through the temples, you would, after about an inch and a half, you would run into it. And this insula part of the brain is very involved with hunger, pleasure, addiction. Addiction is very involved with this, and it's You know, I've never, well, I was going to say I've never been addicted. Maybe I'm addicted to caffeine. I don't know. I can live without it. But I've heard people who got addicted to drugs and they sacrificed their own children for drugs. So this intensity is what I'm trying to say in the brain to see the world through conformity is powerful. So now I've laid this groundwork, and where am I going to go with this? You'll see, but we're going to take this journey that my issue with Christianity, and I'm saying, we're in a post-Christian world. It's a post-Christian culture world. General society has said, it's not working. it's bizarre. It's out of touch with reality. We don't want it anymore. So they're leaving. And my voice, the only voice I have, I'm a hermit. I don't write books, not nonfiction books anymore, nothing like that. To speak is that, wait a minute. Okay, if you don't like the Christian culture, that doesn't bother me. Get rid of it. But the historical Jesus, you should study his life and his message, and I just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's my only point. But what I'm speaking against is Christian culture. Now here's where I want to go back to the way I started. I'm going to end on this. Is I'm not attacking Christian culture as evil, of the devil, and stuff like that. Not at all. The people who love Christian culture, including my wife does a lot more than I do, are good people, better people than me, smarter people than me. But Christian culture is just culture. It's immoral. Most time culture is immoral. I mean, if you get to a Nazi culture, that's immoral. But so that's my approach. Has nothing to do with dogmas, religious dogmas that, you don't believe this, therefore you're a bad person, you're going to hell. But because I'm challenging culture, my life has not been easy. I just went through a hard time again when I came out, started going out in the community again, started getting involved in the church again, and I got clobbered. And I got clobbered over cultural issues, not over anything the Bible says or anything that Jesus of Galilee said, nothing. It was over culture. And I go back to every conflict I've ever had, and I've had a lot. And I don't go marching in and telling people, you're wrong, you're going to hell. Nothing like that. It's that I write in my blog and I tell people, take this or leave it, won't offend me, I'm not certain about it. And they get really angry and at me. And I'm really tired of it. My life is short, and I don't want to argue or fight with people. But I just want to clarify that. I'm talking about culture. I'm saying culture is extraneous. That's all I'm saying. It's not evil. You're not going to hell. None of that stuff. It's just extraneous. So I want to, as we take this journey down this scary, scary canyon where we deconstruct ourselves psychologically, emotionally, the culture, and start looking at the essence, I want to be a liberating thing, a very liberating thing. I throw out little tidbits now as a litmus test. I know I talked about abortion last time, but I'm going to talk about the church. And one of the areas that 99.99% of Christians will disagree with me on is that based on me studying church history, I don't think what we call the church today is a God institution. I think it's a human institution. And that's not a bad thing. Humans have all kinds of institutions. So the culture of church I'm going to say some bold statements, but if this bothers you, it's probably a good time for you to say, okay, I'm not going to follow this anymore. In my definition, religion, and if your religion or whatever you want to call it is different, good for you. I'm not saying this is your religion, but my definition of religion is a man-made system for enhancing one's sense of piety. That's why when I was a missionary in the Middle East, I saw a very dysfunctional group of people because they were each trying to be more pious than the other, and it becomes very competitive. You want to hurt the other person, you want to push them down in a stealthy way, not to be obvious, but so that kind of competition. So when you go into a system that the number one thing is to make you feel pious, and you come in and you say one little word that challenges the conformity, you have hell to pay, because they want to point out that you are inferior, your relationship with God is inferior, or even I've had many letters tell me that I'm bound for hell. I don't know, but for different reasons. Anyway, so I'm going to close on that. I'm trying to put out a video once a week. I'm an amateur at this. I hope to do better, learn my way around doing some editing and things. Please stick around if you're interested in this. I expect everyone who comes here to disagree with me, and that doesn't hurt my feelings. It hurts my feelings if you write me nasty letters telling you hope my cancer kills me. I had one letter like that, and that's just painful. I don't understand religious cruelty. And I was going to say one more thing, and then it shut up. I was thinking about this this morning. I don't know. I just had a sort of awkward situation with a Christian group, and I'm always baffled by this. I don't understand, I'm not a person that really understands social things well. But I started thinking, why is it every time I walk into a church and get involved with a group, something weird happens? And I started thinking, well, wait a minute. I've spent 20 some years in medical systems with committees and groups, and none of this ever happened. I don't remember ever weird things happening I don't know what you would call it. But so there is something unique, I think, about religious systems. And I think it's this thing of piety. Everybody wants, I have a new way of being spiritual. I follow this guru, and I'm going to be more spiritual than you. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I am better than other people or more spiritual or anything like that. It's just that I made a commitment in 1990 that I was going to pursue truth at all cost. Now, I think in a previous video I said I was going to pursue God with all costs. But I remember literally praying, God, I don't know if you're there or not, but I'm living in Barbie land of lies and smoke and mirrors, and that's not working. So I'm going to turn and look for truth, because if there's a creator, their habitat is reality. It's truth. It's not, you don't have to, do fake miracles and all this stuff. You know what my point is. So if you got into truth and found out there is no God, well, then there's no God. So that was my pursuit, the pursuit of profound honesty of seeking truth, and that's all. Well, I rambled too much today. Next time I'll try not to do it so much. You have a good day.